Thanks everybody for joining the Flexible Metadata Session 1. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything in the chat. Okay. If you didn't notice, I sent out an email to everybody that had registered for this session, but if you're joining and you didn't get that email, there's going to be 2 flexible metadata sessions. This first one is going to be focusing on near-term metadata projects and possibilities, and then the one tomorrow morning, or morning Eastern United States time, is going to be focused more on long-term future implementations, integrations with other external tools, things like that. So bigger, longer-term projects tomorrow. Most of the projects we'll be talking about today will be things that have already happened or that are implementable in the current version of Dataverse. So to just introduce myself, I'm Katie Micah. I'm the data services librarian at Harvard Library, and I also am on the data curation team at IQSS with the Harvard Dataverse folks. So I'd like to take just a second for Jim and Steve to go ahead and introduce themselves. They are my co-chairs, and you'll probably be hearing from them a lot more in these sessions.
Yep. Hi, I'm Jim Myers, working with some of the Dataverse instances as well as GDCC, as you probably heard. I think that's probably enough, as I'll be sharing tomorrow morning. Steve just joined. Steve, if you didn't hear, we're asking you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, there we go. Yes, I'm Dr. Steve McEachran. I'm Director of the Australian Data Archive here in Canberra, Australia, Australian National University. I'm also Chair of the DDI Alliance, so I'll be talking a bit about that, one of the metadata standards that underpins Dataverse.
Great, thanks so much, guys. All right, so just a quick overview of the next hour that we're going to be spending some time together. We're going to have 3 presentations about the Darwin core metadata block, some DDI updates, and an overview of the Dataverse North best practice document that was recently released. We are going to do this flexible metadata session a bit different from some of the other breakout sessions that have been happening so far. We are not going to have, we're not going to sort people into breakout rooms for the discussion. I think we're going to try and keep everybody together in one group. I'll ask Sonia and Tanya to post the community notes doc maybe a few times in the next 20 minutes to sort of make sure everybody coming in gets that link. We're going to really ask, we're going to lean a lot heavier on that document than I think other breakout sessions have. So what that means is hopefully if you have high level, large discussion questions that you'd like to bring to the table, please add those in the community doc. There's already a few populated in there that Jim has come up with actually. There's some really good ones to kick us off, but if you have any that you came hoping to discuss, please add them. And then we're going to use the raise hand feature after the presentations to both participate in the discussion and then also to ask specific questions to any of the presenters. And Sonia, our moderator, will be calling on people that way. So sort around in your Zoom right now, if you can't sort of see exactly what this all looks like, where the hand raising button is, things like that. If you have any questions, throw them in the chat. We can answer and help troubleshoot Zoom issues. Please, just some tips for Zoom, please keep yourself muted unless you really want to say something. It helps with background noise, things like that. This session is being recorded actually. So you should have gotten a notification when you joined the meeting, but just to reiterate, it is being recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, if you don't want your voice recorded, just add anything in the community notes doc. That is an anonymous document. So if you log out of your Google account, you will still be able to access the document and you'll just be posting it anonymously. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Olga, who is our first presenter. And you can go ahead and start sharing.
Okay, hello everyone. Let me share my screen. Okay, here we go. My name is Olga Kurek. I'm a data scientist at Open Forest Data Repository, where we'll be using Dataverse to share data about our biological collections of our Mammal Research Institute, and to share them with the public. And we'll use Darwin Core metadata to describe those collections. So what is this Darwin Core data standard? The Darwin Core is an extension of Darwin Core for biodiversity informatics. Actually, it is a glossary of terms that are used to describe the biodiversity data, and it facilitates the sharing of this information. It consists of 239 fields that are grouped in 12 classes. And what can we describe using Darwin Core standard? It is primarily based on taxa. We can describe species, their occurrence in nature, different observations, samples, or other related observations. I've got a full list of terms under this link that you can see later. Darwin Core is a community standard in biological sciences, and it is used by different well-respected data repositories like GBIF, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. It is the biggest, the most important database on biodiversity. Also, Natural History Museum uses Darwin Core to describe their collections, as well as Atlas of Living Australia. There are those examples. This is GBIF, how it looks like. This is Natural History Museum and their records from their collection. And this is Atlas of Living Australia. And how does it work? So actually, I said that Darwin Core data standard is a set glossary of terms, and those terms can be used in different ways. It can be used as a so-called simple Darwin Core or a Darwin Core archive data sharing package. Simple Darwin Core, it is just a table consisting of a subset of those terms that we can choose to describe our collection. It is very simple. It's just a table. Those terms are in columns. Our records are, and each record can be described by a single term. And what is Darwin Core archive? It is a kind of relational database where our records are described by those core terms. And this description can be enriched with extensions of this core database. This is it is a so-called star schema. This is the relation between core and extension is one-to-many, that we can enrich this core description of our resources by those extensions. This Darwin Core archive also consists of XML file that describes the structure of this data package, as well as an EML file which consists of metadata of this data package, things like contacts or people responsible for the data set. So what have we done?
Olga, just the timing, 5 minutes left.
What have we done in our Open Forest data repository to implement this Darwin Core schema? we can say that we've implemented simple Darwin core, this Darwin core data standards, that we defined those terms, because it can be easily defined and implemented. But if you want to implement this Darwin core archive schema, it is much more difficult to implement this logic into Dataverse. What we need to do that to make those extensions possible is to make a flexible field grouping within Dataverse while defining our metadata block. Also, the problem that I've encountered is that activating and inactivating fields within a group of fields in metadata schema is impossible. It would be useful to make those schemas more flexible to cater to different needs of users. Also, when we talk about flexible field grouping, we must think about how to display those fields. Because what I've encountered during defining this metadata block, that those display options are really, it was a problem to use them, and it caused a lot of errors. As well as I think that it would be useful to define external controlled vocabularies. It would be very useful for us to define vocabularies of taxonomy, of vocabularies of species, because now we can only hard code those vocabularies into metadata blocks. And it is not useful to hard code those values for like things that are changing, because the taxonomy is changing all the time. So it would be useful to have those external controlled vocabularies that allow us to define those flexible terms. And thank you a lot.
That was great, Olga. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So you have 2 minutes if you want to take some questions. We do have one question if you want to take it now, Katie.
Yeah, I think we've got a couple minutes. Let's go ahead and do it.
Okay. So can you see the question there, Olga? It's from Phil, and it's Philip Conzet, and it says, is it just field grouping, or is there any hierarchy involved?
I don't see this question.
I'll put it in, I'll recopy it into the chat for you.
Okay.
There you go. I put it into the chat.
Actually, I think field grouping is flexible field grouping is enough to have this schema mimicked by the Dataverse that I described, these core terms and group of fields that serve as those extensions, that those groups can be repeated as those extensions. Yeah, I think there's no higher hierarchy, just those groups are enough to do that.
Great. Katie, are you going to introduce your next speaker?
Yeah, that's great. I just want to say, Jim mentioned if you have some details or examples that you'd like to put in the community doc, that would be Excellent. Either from you, Olga, or from Thomas from the chat. Please add those to our notes doc. Okay, Steve, it is off to you.
Thanks very much, Katie. I will switch over to my PowerPoint. I'll need, oh, so I probably need screen share at this point. Yep, excellent. Okay. Alrighty, so I'm screen sharing at this point. I will switch into full screen mode. Okay, so I'm Dr. Stephen Kekron from Australian Data Archive and from the DDI Alliance. I'm going to give a short presentation today about some of the recent updates that have been happening with DDI and some new projects that I think, picking up from the discussion we've just had, actually have similar opportunities there as well. I say I'm drawing upon, just bring together a series of activities that have been going on in the last 12 months, and I just want to highlight those for the community. Just as I'm not going to go into detail with any of them, but you can pick up more information on a number of them. I'll point out where from as we go through. So, okay, so for those who aren't aware, the DDI Alliance is a member-based alliance of archives, producers, institutions, and government agencies right around the world. There's a series of technical specs that support data and metadata and data management. The two existing ones known as DDI Codebook, and I'll say a bit more about that as we go through. This is for basically data description, DDI lifecycle for data management and particularly data collection, and a new specification which I'll talk about as well, called DDI cross-domain integration, which is a new release where putting out for comment around data integration, which we hope has some opportunities as well. The other thing, if you weren't aware, DDI is basically baked into a lot of what's within Dataverse. So it's actually DDI Codebook is implemented in Dataverse, and you'll see within the citation metadata block, and actually in the social science, and to some degree within the geographic metadata block as well. The elements of DDI Codebook are there in a number of different ways. There's quite a bit of overlap with Dublin Core as well, for those who are familiar with Dublin Core, but it's basically implementing a number of the what we call study level metadata fields, and then all the variable metadata in Dataverse describing codes, concepts, categories, etc., are actually based around the DDI Codebook standard as well. This is actually one of the things that's enabled tools such as the Scholars Portal, Data Curation Tool, and Data Explorer to exist. So a number of you will be familiar with those, but for those who aren't, I just wanted to sort of introduce those. So it's been a busy 12 to 18 months actually for the DDI Alliance, and there's some new developments we've been working on that we think are going to be useful for the community here, the Dataverse community here. And I'm going to touch on each of those. So I want to talk a little bit briefly about updates to DDI Codebook, a project that's outside of what the Alliance has been doing, but within the consortium of the European Social Science Data Archives, a vocabulary service that I think touches on some of the points we've just heard, and then a little bit about the future developments with CDI. Okay, so as I said, DDI Codebook has been sort of baked into Dataverse for a while now. It's now 20 years old as a standard. There's been up to version 2.5. There's an intent now to start looking at updating the Codebook standard to a 2.6 release. So there's been interest in enhancements to Codebook. There's probably more content we could include, and that includes developments with Dataverse and some other repository environments as well. There is one being developed by the World Bank that gets used extensively in Africa as well, called NADA. And we're interested in, be able to describe more broadly some of the content that people are interested in managing. So the intent here. Yep, thanks, Sonia. In looking at what revisions need to be made to DDI Codebook, what extensions, how can we make it more usable? when I maneuver things around my screen, I lose focus on the PowerPoint, unfortunately. So we're looking for people interested in contributing to the short-term goals of the next version of DDI Codebook and possibly the long-term development rules as well. And there's a link to, I can provide links to both of those intentions. There's a background document on this. Certainly we want people to be looking at some of the new issues, to file any new issues, and providing feedback back on Codebook. And for those of you interested in looking how it might integrate with Dataverse, that would be a key part of that. Julian from the Harvard team, Janet McDougall and I are all part of the working group. There may be others as well from this community, but certainly if you're interested, please feel free to get in touch. So that's part one, new developments to DDI Codebook. The second one I wanted to quickly highlight was the recently produced product from CESDA, say the Consortium of European Social Science Data Archives, who've produced a vocabulary service. So they've now got an online vocabulary service. It's in English, but with translations into about 8 or 10 different languages now. The reason that's relevant for this community, it actually provides an accessible version of a significant number of the DDI vocabularies, particularly DDIC. So there's both, so it seems to me there's potential for use of that in autocompletes, controlled lists, the sorts of applications we've just been discussing. And we'd like to talk further tomorrow about some of how we might, the potential for integration of those sorts of vocabulary services with Dataverse. I say member associations produce these. Certainly there's interest in extending that to other countries as well. So if you're looking for sort of a supply of some of the DDI vocabularies, and these can be quite small, a lot of the fields that are in Dataverse, this is a service you might be interested in. So, and it makes it available in things like, it's got version control, DDI usage and the like, but it's also got SCOS and RDF implementation and an API. So I think there's a potential there for those who are interested. And you can find it at vocabularies.cesda.eu. And if you're interested, I think there'll be probably people on this call, but Ron Decker and Carsten at CESDA certainly can provide more information on that as well. The last one I want to talk about is DDI CDI. So this is a new standard that's come out, we've put out for public release last month. April, and we're looking for people to review that now. And there's a series of webinars actually going on at the moment, reviewing those. So for those who might be familiar with DDI development, recently we've had a long-term development of what we call DDI4. The idea was to produce a new version of DDI. What we've actually found though, and I'm going to quickly summarize this rather than go into detail, is people weren't looking for a replacement of DDI, the earlier versions. What they're looking at is a complement to them. So we're looking really for, and the aim of this version is for data integration, how to describe and be able to work with and integrate data across data sets, across different styles of data. So what we've been seeing, larger research projects, broader volume of sources, and increased need for computing with data. And Sasha talked a little bit about that yesterday as well. So the demands on machine actionable metadata have certainly been growing, and be able to put things around both data, just actioning and accessing the data itself, and be able to describe provenance. Yep, that's the intent of this standard. So the orientation of this is around just add description and provenance. So be able to understand the variety of formats that you might be getting, the means of how to get it, how to access it, and returning accurate content in a number of formats, and be able to describe the provenance of data at a detailed level. We'll be looking for reviewers as we go forward. I'm going to post a link in the chat. There's already been a couple of extended introductory webinars that have been done, and I'll post links to where you can view those going forward. There'll be a couple more coming up, but certainly we're looking for active reviewers and implementers. And if you're interested in an implementation of the DDI CDI, I say it's a review process at the moment, but we're looking for implementation by the end of the year for the full release. So if you're interested in talking more, please contact the Alliance as well, DDIalliance.org.
Thank you. It is 6:25, but we have a question from Mercedes that we can take, Katie?
Yeah, sure.
So Steve in the chat, Mercedes asking, is the
Sorry,
idea?
yeah,
Yep.
I didn't explain it well. I think what I meant is that so we still keep DDI Codebook with the variable metadata and all this, and TDI complements it. Is that at the data set level that complements it, or how?
So I think, as I say, we're still figuring that part out at the moment, Merce. I think the way that will actually work is it's likely you'll get the study metadata through Codebook. So all the, sort of the descriptive metadata, and then at the variable level, actually, that's where you'd be working extensively with CDI. So it takes the original content that's in the variable level content in DDI Codebook and makes it much more actionable than it, it's reasonably good now, but makes it much more actionable. What we've also put in there is be able to work with it at the datum level. So the idea is you could reconfigure and reorganize things effectively, pull datums with or cells out of one content, merge, integrate them across different data sets, which has some very interesting potential for the sorts of things we're interested in this community.
That's great. That's great. But it also means it has implications to Data Explorer and other tools that might be using the
it certainly does. So as I say, and that's why we sort of mentioned, sort of for detailed implementations, and Dataverse would be one of these. Certainly looking at bringing a group together to how that might occur would be a key part of that discussion.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Steve. Okay, if you want to go ahead and click out of your screen share, wonderful. All right, Alex and Martine, it is off to you guys.
Thank you. Alex is gonna share the screen.
Almost there. Oops. There we go.
Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Martine and I am the research data librarian at Université Laval in Quebec. And I will be presenting with Alexandra Cooper, a librarian and the data service coordinator at Queen's University in Ontario. And we are here today to talk about the best practices guide created by the Dataverse North Metadata Group. So I will start with a brief introduction of the Portage Network. The Portage Network is a national initiative of CARL, the Canadian Association of Research Libraries. The goal was to build research data management capacity in Canada through a network of experts. The Dataverse North Working Group is one of the Portage working groups and has subgroups such as the Policy Working Group, the Training Working Group, and the Metadata Working Group. You will find the link for the Portage Network in the chat. The Dataverse North community major objectives are to develop community of practice for Canadian Dataverse users, to discuss local and national training support service, that outreach strategies, promotion and infrastructure development and needs, and to provide advice for data preservation, data discovery, curation, metadata, and training. The Dataverse North Metadata Group, for its part, has the objective to provide recommendation for a default Portage metadata template, a discipline-specific Portage metadata template, labeling, describing, and organizing files. It also has to identify training opportunity for using metadata. As a major aspect of the training activity, the group has developed a metadata best practices guide based on the different metadata blocks within Dataverse. The best practices guide is the product of our working group. Here you have the links for the English and the French version of the guide. You may be wondering why we made the decision to make this guide. Well, it was to provide guidance for marking up data sets for consistency within the Dataverses in Canada, either university or consortial.
So in version 2 of the guide, which we just released recently, we added guidance for the social science and humanities block and the geospatial block. For each field, a definition is included, and where necessary, a tip with further information. Examples illustrating the use of each of the fields is also included. Fields were identified as required, recommended, or optional based on best practices. We also included a strongly recommended for fields that we thought should be required but are not required by the basic installation of Dataverse out of the box. This is a screenshot of this page of the citation metadata block within the guide. And it's showing the fields, the definition with the tips, and the tips are in italics, whether a field is required, recommended, or optional, and the example. This is another example from the guide. This is from the geospatial block. In this example, we provide this screenshot of both the edit view and the public view, so users can see how filling in the fields will then display in the public view. There were a number of issues and challenges in creating this best practices guide. Balancing complying with DDI with some of the fields in the Dataverse template where they're not exactly the same or they don't behave exactly the same led to a lot of discussion. In Canada, Dataverse is bilingual, so we published the guide in English and French, and therefore needed examples in both English and French. However, there are currently not enough French examples in Dataverse to include in the French version, so we've ended up including the English examples in the French version. As more French data sets are added into Dataverse, we will be revisiting the guide and changing those examples. In translating terms in Dataverse to French, there was a lot of discussion about what French word would best convey the idea. Sometimes the direct translation of the word was not the appropriate, or was not the best option. Lastly, members of the working group are volunteers, and it can be difficult to prioritize this kind of work when it is not part of the major part of your job. It sometimes took quite a while to meet and to finish sections. The social science and humanities section so far has taken the longest because we had 2 members go on leave in the middle of working on that section, which left 1 member to do most of the work. These are the members of our Dataverse North Metadata Working Group, and they represent institutions from across Canada, which also provides another challenge for time zones, as all of us here understand. And finally, if you'd like to know more about our group or this guide, you can email a portage at this email address and they'll get in touch with us. Thank you.
So you do have, thank you very much. You do have about 3 minutes for questions. And we had a question from Philip Cosette. Is the guide aimed at curators, support staff, or rather depositors?
We tried to hit all of those audiences. It can be a little technical for people who are beginning to deposit, but the intention was that anybody who's doing something around depositing data into Dataverse would be able to use this guide and get some guidance from it. The reason we included the tips and the examples was for those beginner depositors who may not quite understand what we're saying or what the definition means. So we tried to hit everybody. There's also, on the Portage website, the training expert group has written a number of resources around research data management, but also Dataverse that will help people aimed at people learning Dataverse and help them deposit data into Dataverse. For beginner depositors, using this guide along with some of those training resources would work very well because they tend to complement each other.
Merce, did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I was thinking that if it was for the depositors could use it, if you thought of ways that it would be useful to have a version that could be more integrated with the UI, meaning that maybe there could be, well, it could be like a resource bundle or some way that you would get the more information right there in the UI.
Yeah. Actually, so Portage has a number of expert groups, and another one of their expert groups is the curation expert group. They now have a subgroup, which I'm also on, which is the Dataverse curation working group. And that's actually exactly what we're working on. We're working on a Dataverse curation toolkit that will sort of pull together all of these pieces and guides of Dataverse to make it easier for users to use Dataverse, to teach themselves how to use Dataverse, for people in data professionals in libraries or various institutions who have to teach researchers how to use Dataverse. We have a very grandiose view of what this is going to be. We've just started this month. But the idea is to basically bring everything together so that it's all in one place. So we are working towards that type of thing.
Thank you, Alexandra. Go ahead, Katie. Actually, if you want me to bring this up, Katie, the next one is the questions moderated by me. So.
Yeah. So Sonia, if you don't mind, there's the questions in the community notes doc.
Yes, sure.
Great.
So let me come down.
I just want to quickly ask if no one has any more questions for any of our speakers. Just one more chance for specific speaker questions before we move on.
I had another question.
Yeah,
Am I
go ahead,
allowed one more question? Yeah, it's mostly related to what Olga presented and the part about the control vocabularies, but it could connect to all the talks, right? But so in I believe that Slava is not here now. It's very late for Europe, but he had presented in the past a widget that would make it easier to select a control vocabulary. I mean, from already from something that could easily integrate with Dataverse, like without being like an external tool that from when you edit the metadata field, you could just call that tool and choose from a control vocabulary. So I was wondering, I guess for Olga, is that something like that, what you would imagine, so that it's not necessarily something, it's external tool, but we could provide the instructions of how to build this widget that where you would support whatever control vocabulary you want for your database.
Yeah, I think it could be very useful. Also, another thing that I would find useful is to make controlled vocabularies that for different fields that depend on each other, that make some kind of a structure, like in taxonomy. That if I choose one term in one field, then the other terms in next fields depend on that term chosen. So maybe it also could be implemented by this external tool.
Katie, I put the first question from your community notes question section, the potential discussion questions, into the chat.
Sonia, can I just do a quick follow up on MSA's question as well? Yeah, this is partly why I sort of flagged the CESDA work that was going on, as well as, you know, the extent to which, you know, if you've got a vocabulary service that is serving, you know, vocabularies up, there is a similar one here in Australia as well, run by the Australian Research Data Commons, what used to be known as ANS. You know, so a mechanism by which we can basically look up those external reference vocabularies. You know, the service is already provided. It's generally got an API, or, you know, at least a download option, you know, accessible to it. The extent to which you can then leverage those, you know, to populate those fields. I mean, quite literally, the CESDA vocabulary service has, you know, probably 10 or 12 of the vocabularies that would go directly into the Dataverse fields, as, you know, they're basically returning the DDI vocabularies. So, you know, similarly with other metadata blocks, it'd be good to be able to just do that lookup. Or at least be able to import them effectively.
I think that would be extremely useful. Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to make a comment there too. One of the things that, you know, Dataverse is really good at is the richness of the metadata blocks, in terms of how much it allows you to provide a description of that field, provide the blank value, do the formatting of it, and so on. And so I've looked at, you know, different metadata services that are external, might present just a term, or they might have that description, or they might have the you know, the common human term and the URL. And so I think one of the challenges, aside from thinking about how do we get some of the flexibility that's in the display and entry forms of the metadata blocks to connect with those, is how do we deal with vocabulary services that may actually provide a lot more of that formatting and other information, where some are just a list of words. So in some sense, we talk about bringing them all in, but I think there's a lot of variability out there that's part of the challenge in this.
Mm.
Any more questions? Okay, well, coming from Katie, do you want to share the document? Because then people can, I can share the document if you'd like me to, and then everyone can see the questions that you came up with for potential discussion.
I've got it going right now.
Great.
So yeah, in case folks are not in the community document, this is sort of the section we were thinking for our discussion. So I've got the first question highlighted. What makes metadata block creation easy or hard? Any changes that might help? Support documentation, things like that, whatever you think would be an asset for this part.
Sherry Lake from University of Virginia. Yeah, it's understanding how the metadata blocks are created in the TSV file. Because we actually, I actually touch that file. And so whenever that metadata block gets updated and new releases, I have to go back and see what I've changed. And mainly what I've changed is I've actually added a required field. So I've been told many times by the Dataverse team to not change anything that's already required by Dataverse. I haven't done that, but I have added a new required field, but it has to be done in a certain way in that table. And I've also made some of the tips a little more understandable, I thought, for my users than typical DDI users. So I have gone in and, but I've only just edited a block, which is a little complicated. I haven't even thought about what steps you need to go in to actually make a totally new block, because it includes updating Solr indexes, and I know Julian's been working on a guide. I just haven't had the nerve to try it myself. I don't want to mess anything up.
Good. I'd probably reflect a little bit more on that. It's Steve here again. Similar to Sherry, is we experimented with metadata blocks early on when we started using it. The pain we suffered there meant we've never gone back. So I think the nervousness about what happens if you change something is, makes us very reticent to be using custom metadata blocks. In any sort of space. So, I mean, what occurs to me might be useful there is, when you come to control vocabularies, adding in control vocabularies through a UI is not always fun, but to the extent to which you could manage those custom metadata blocks through UI, I think would be pretty helpful, because it sort of potentially limits the mistakes you might make there by, controlling what it is that you have capacity to break as much as anything.
I think that goes pretty well into the next sort of sub question here about what flexibility is needed. I wonder who put it in, but I have a suspicion that it might have been Jim, because he's been talking a lot about that same thing, Steve, about how it's really easy to break things.
Mm. Well,
I think that, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, from QDR, who's done some metadata block customization, I actually dug through to figure out when you can and can't break things. So I have some inside knowledge there, but I definitely, my take on this is, I think maintaining and managing and continuing to merge on somebody else's metadata block is a challenge for all the reasons you're saying. Creating a new one, I'd be curious to ask Olga, it sounds like it was difficult to get the mapping to the external standard to work due to the complexity of the standard, but is it hard to actually produce that new metadata block versus, I think now that it's there, if we try to make changes to it or people want to customize it, I think everything that we're talking about is bad. But and the grouping was just that Olga was asking about, is there, was mentioning that there was problems with the grouping capability, and I was just curious to ask more.
Yes, actually, as I said, there is in the Darwin card, there's a difference between this data standard, which is a set of terms that I defined, and these ways of using that terms. So if we want to use these terms as this archive, we need to choose those fields that we need, because there is a lot of them. We don't need all of them, and enable this custom grouping that will give us our metadata schema that suits our needs. And it is quite impossible now. Choosing our own subset of fields is possible now, but without grouping. So, as I said, this only simple way of using this metadata schema is possible now in Dataverse.
Can I just get a clarification?
For a question.
So can I just get a clarification from Jim and or Olga? Is by grouping here, what are we grouping? I'm just trying to clarify in my head. I can think of a couple of ways that might. Yep.
We take a set of fields that we can populate with multiple values, which is very important in these extensions to this schema. So it should be flexible, but now we can't do it. Like choose our own subset of fields that we want to populate with a lot of values.
We have a question from Thomas Janelle.
Actually, it has been answered. I just wanted to well, I'm not really familiar yet with metadata, with adding metadata, the process, but I really well sympathized with the first presenter because I just tried as it was a test run for me to create a new block based on the core scientific metadata schema, and as it is a relational model, I found it hard to reflect it faithfully in Dataverse, and I think it's kind of problematic because you have to choose which fields you are going to add to your new block, and you have to make it also flat. You lose the relational dimension of the original model, or maybe I didn't catch something obvious.
All right. I'd like to make sure we can move on to some of the other questions with only a few minutes left. It looks like there's some good discussion happening in question 2 about XML and RDF. If anyone wants to sort of further explain their thoughts on Dataverse support for both XML and RDF.
6 minutes left for questions here.
We can probably leave a little bit more time for questions. My final wrap up will not take 5 whole minutes.
Okay.
One question connected to that for the support of RDF, what would give us that is more additional to JSON LD, to having linked data, JSON linked data?
So you want more use of that?
No, I'm wondering, like supporting RDF, how people are thinking, what would give us additional, and what would be the benefit in addition to what supporting JSON LD gives us?
Well, at some level, JSON LD is a serialization of RDF. So if you put that out, automated tools can convert them because they represent the same RDF graph. But I think if I step back from that to the, one of the challenges here is that if you look at a metadata block, it's at best a hierarchy, and again, it doesn't have a lot of flexibility. There either are or are not children fields. There's not a lot of options to turn those on and off. And XML is hierarchical, but has some additional flexibility. And RDF is a real graph, which I think gets to what Thomas is saying with relations, right? You can have things that don't follow a hierarchical model at all. And so as you start to try and think about how you're going to let metadata be put in that goes beyond the bounds of those things, you've got to start thinking about how certain metadata fields can link to other data sets or to other people or other objects. And those things start to become objects on their own, and you don't just have data sets and files, but you have other metadata objects that you're starting to track. And that's I think the base of some of the challenge in here, that it's neither an answer, it's more of an observation that I think that's a root of one of the things we're trying to think through.
Can I ask a question for Steve, just in that discussion about RDF? And I know one of the big questions is just knowing whether DDI has, there's some RDF implementation, but it's just a segment of DDI. And obviously DDI is complex, and like Jim was saying, it comes from the XML way of organizing information. So just would be really curious to know any comments on where RDF fits into the development of DDI.
Yeah. So I there is an implementation of a part of DDF. It's called the Disco vocabulary, was the one that was there. This was actually one of the reasons for producing CDI. So I didn't go into the details, and I dig into I put a couple of the introduction videos into the chat for folks. RDF is certainly a part of that. Our problem in the DDI technical group has been a lack of expertise in RDF. Quite literally. Like, so we've had some really good people in RDF. W3C folks come in and out of the working groups at different times, but we frankly, what we actually need is someone who's got an extended period of time where they could commit to some of that, or a group more likely commit to some of that translation. That was part of the reason for establishing the model-based DDI. That was one of the incentives, was that you should be able to express DDI in your preferred flavor, and JSON would be a third one, to be frank. That was always an intent. It's just capability is what we don't have. So we've had, as I say, we've done parts of this work periodically. Richard Zaganiak helped to produce the first version of Disco, and as I say, we took another go at it a couple of years back, but it's been a question of resources and expertise within that working group. So if there's anyone who's interested, please feel free to get in touch. So we'd absolutely love to be able to be pushing in that direction.
Okay, well, unfortunately, it might be time for a call for final comments. Any burning questions or last minute additions that you would like to add before we wrap up for today? Okay. Well, I would like to thank all of you guys for a really rich discussion. We only got through 2 of the questions. Well, we only touched 2 of the questions. I wouldn't say we got through them. But such is the nature of a breakout session. Thank you to all of our presenters. Everything was incredibly interesting. Thank you very much for putting all of that together. And I'd also definitely like to thank Sonia and Tanya for helping out with the chat and with the community notes. Tanya, your notes are terrific and will be very helpful for everybody reviewing them afterwards. And then just to finish up, tomorrow morning session is going to be a little bit different. So we're going to be focusing on some of the more long-term projects associated with or related to metadata in Dataverse. Here are some of the questions that we have put together for that discussion. So if anybody's planning on attending both, you have a sneak preview, I suppose, in these last 2 minutes. So with that, I will go ahead and wrap up. Thanks so much, everybody.